Montana Territory, late spring of 1878, the wind dragged dust off the plains like it was trying to erase everything left behind. The rusted shack sat at the edge of a dried-up creek, its roof sagging in the middle, door hanging crooked on one hinge. Inside, Naomi O'Connor curled her knees to her chest and pulled the threadbare quilt tighter around her. The wind slipped through the cracks in the walls like fingers. She had not cried when the stagecoach left. She had not cried when the man who was supposed to be her husband never showed. But last night, when her only pair of shoes tore clean down the sole, she cried until her throat hurt. She had come all the way from Pennsylvania on the promise of a letter and a wedding band. The letter had been sweet. The man had lied. After 3 days of waiting at the general store in town, with whispers chasing her every step, the storekeeper's wife gave her directions to this old line shack no one used anymore. "Better than sleeping in the street," the woman had said, without looking her in the eye. And now, after 8 nights in this lean-to of splintered wood and rusted nails, Naomi was running out of food, running out of hope, and the cold crawled deeper into her bones. The knock came just after sunrise. Soft. Then again, firmer, Naomi flinched, clutching the quilt tighter. "Who is it?" "Name's Merritt McAllister," came the answer, low and steady. "I brought supplies, heard someone was out here." She hesitated, her voice cracked. "Who told you?" "Dale Mathers, storekeeper, said a woman was left out here alone." "I figured that meant trouble." Naomi opened the door slowly. The man standing there was tall, sun-browned, with a straight back and a quiet way about him. His boots were dusted white from the trail. He held a burlap sack in one hand and a toolbox in the other. She tightened the quilt around her shoulders. "I did not ask for help." "Reckon you did not," Merritt said, "but I am offering it anyway." Naomi looked past him. A paint horse stood tethered a few yards off, chewing dry weeds. Behind the horse, the land stretched empty and quiet all the way to the mountains. "I do not need charity." "I did not say it was." She stepped aside. "Well, come in then. If you are going to stand there arguing, might as well do it inside." The shack was barely big enough for one cot and a broken chair. Merritt ducked inside, setting down the sack and toolbox. He looked around, eyes catching on the warped floorboards and the hole in the roof. "This place is not fit for a dog," he said. "I know that," Naomi replied. He pulled out a tin of beans, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, and a tin cup. "Eat. Then I will patch the worst holes before the rain finds you." She sat slowly, the warmth of food too tempting to turn away. "Why are you helping me?" Merritt knelt by the wall, running his hand over the rotted wood. "Because someone should have. And because I know what it feels like to be left behind." She watched him work. His hands moved with quiet purpose, steady and sure. He did not ask questions. He did not look at her like she was some broken thing. By midday, he had hammered a board across the roof's worst leak and replaced the door hinge. Naomi stood outside, arms crossed, watching. "Why do you care?" she asked again. Merritt wiped sweat from his brow. "I had a sister, Clara." She answered an ad once. "Man turned out to be worse than a drunk. She never made it home." Naomi's throat tightened. "I am sorry, me too." They stood in silence. The wind had settled. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. "You can stay," Naomi said. "I was not planning on running off," Merritt replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. "But thank you." That night, he lit a small fire outside the shack. They shared the bread and beans, and Naomi told him how she had been a seamstress back east, how her parents had died in a winter fever. How she had no one left. "I came here to be someone's wife," she said softly. "I thought I would matter to someone." Merritt stared into the fire. "You do?" She looked at him, surprised. "You matter," he repeated, not looking away. "Even if the man who wrote those letters was a coward." Naomi felt something shift in her chest, not hope exactly, but something close to it. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Merritt had gone back to town at first light and returned with lumber. All day he worked. Replaced the roof beam, mended the walls, rebuilt the chair. Naomi sewed patches into the torn quilt while he worked. He stayed nearby after that, rode out every morning, came back every evening. Each day the shack grew less broken. Each day so did she. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned orange at the edges, Naomi stood beside him, watching the land stretch wide and endless. She heard him exhale beside her. "I never meant to stay here long," she said, "I know. But now I do not want to leave." He looked at her, eyes steady. "Then do not." She turned to face him. "What are we doing, Merritt?" "I am fixing what someone else broke." She stepped closer. "And when the walls are done, I will still be here." Naomi reached up, touched his jaw with her fingertips. "Is that a promise?" He nodded once. "Yes." She leaned in and he met her halfway. The kiss was not rushed, it was not desperate, it was quiet, steady like Merritt himself. And in it she felt something strong begin to grow, not just love, belonging. She pulled back, eyes wide. "I am afraid." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "So am I, but I am still here." And he was. The cowboy who repaired more than the walls. By early June, the land had begun to green in places, though the wind still carried grit across the flats. Naomi stood barefoot in the doorway of the shack, her hem brushing her ankles as she watched Merritt drive a fence post into the soil. He'd taken to building a corral just west of the slope, saying little about it, but she knew it meant he intended to stay longer than the weather. She stepped down from the stoop, careful not to catch her foot on the uneven board she hadn't yet replaced. "What's the pen for?" she asked, brushing her hands on her apron. He leaned on the post driver, sweat streaking his brow beneath the brim of his hat. "Horse needs better shelter come storm season. I figured I'd build something proper." Naomi studied the half-dug line. "You've only got the one. For now." She folded her arms, watching him wipe his palms on his trousers. "You thinking of buying more?" "I've been trading work for stock feed out at the Jennings place. They've got a mare there willing to part with, might suit a smaller rider." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "A smaller rider." Merritt looked up at her, his gaze steady. "You said you've never ridden." "That right?" She hesitated. "I never had reason." "Well, now you've got land under your feet and a man who rides out most days. Might be good to know how to follow if you've a mind to." Naomi bit the inside of her cheek. "You planning on riding away?" "No," he said simply, and went back to digging. Later, she sat cross-legged on the ground beside the growing corral, mending a frayed edge of one of the flour sacks he'd brought back from town. The sun angled low, casting long golden light across the dirt. His movements were methodical, like he'd done this 100 times, but she could see the wear in his shoulders. "Do you get lonely, Merritt?" she asked without looking up. He paused long enough to glance over. "Used to it." "That's not the same as answering." He leaned on the shovel. "I lost my mother young, my father after that. I worked cattle from the Red River to the Judith Basin. After a while, a man gets used to eating quiet." She set her needle down and met his gaze. "But used to it isn't the same as wanting it." "No." He pushed his hat back and squinted toward the horizon. "It's not." That night, she cooked pinto beans with a pinch of salt and the last of the dried sage he'd brought her from the foothills. They ate on the stoop, knees nearly touching, the prairie stretching out in silence. "Did you ever think about marrying?" she asked. "Thought about it," he said. "Never found a woman I trusted to walk beside me." Naomi stirred her beans with the edge of her spoon, and now his voice was quiet. "Now I'm wondering if maybe I was just looking in the wrong places." She felt the words settle deep, not like a sudden gust, but like a steady warmth spreading through frost. The next morning, she found a folded scrap of paper tucked beneath the handle of the water bucket. It wasn't the paper that caught her breath, but the stitching a single strand of red thread looped through the corner. She unfolded it to find a rough sketch of a saddle and beneath it, a single line written in his hand. "If you're going to ride, best to do it right." She smiled without meaning to. Her fingers curled around the paper. By week's end, the corral stood finished and a roan mare stood quietly inside it, ears twitching toward every sound. Naomi approached slowly, her hand outstretched. The mare sniffed her palm, warm breath spreading across her skin. "She's yours," Merritt said behind her, voice low so not to startle the animal. Naomi turned, her expression unreadable. I've never owned anything that breathes." "Well," he said, "she'll teach you soon enough how to listen." Naomi spent the next days learning the rhythm of the mare's movements, the feel of the saddle beneath her hands, the patience of letting the animal set the pace. Merritt watched, never correcting too much, only stepping in when she looked uncertain. "You don't like telling folks what to do you?" she asked once, brushing the mare's coat. "No point telling someone something they can learn on their own." She turned toward him. "I wouldn't have lasted out here without you." "You've lasted plenty," he replied. "I just gave you a few nails and a horse." Naomi shook her head. "You gave me a reason not to give up." He looked at her, long and quiet. Then he said, "I don't want to be just a reason." Naomi stepped forward, closing the space between them. "Then what do you want to be?" He took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I want to be the man who stands beside you, not just until the fence is done or the roof holds, but through every storm that comes after." She looked into his eyes, and for once, she didn't feel like she was bracing for something to go wrong. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like that." And he reached for her hand calloused, warm, and held it like it was something precious, not fragile. Together they stood by the corral, the sky softening to lavender above them, and it felt like the first true beginning either of them had ever known. The wind shifted from dry to damp by late June, and with it came the first scent of rain in weeks. Naomi stood beneath the lean-to Merritt had built beside the corral, her fingers damp with linseed oil as she worked it into the saddle's worn leather. The mare dozed behind her, tail flicking lazily at flies. Merritt returned from the ridgeline just past midday, shirt darkened with sweat, a rolled map tucked beneath his arm. "Land agent came through town," he said, tying his horse beside the fence. "Surveyors marked parcels west of the creek. Said they're opening up claims to homesteaders." Naomi set the oil tin aside. "You thinking of filing?" "I'm thinking we've outgrown this shack." She brushed her hands on her skirt. "We," he nodded once, steady, "only makes sense if it's both of us." Naomi leaned against the post. "You sure you want to be bound to land? You've been riding half your life." "I've been riding because I never had a reason to stop," he said, unrolling the map and laying it across the fence rail. "Right here, flat ground, close to water, good grazing. It's not much, but it could be ours." She traced the line of the creek with her fingertip. "It's only 20 acres. It's enough to build something real." Naomi studied the paper, then looked up. "And if I say yes, what would we build?" "Whatever you want," he said, voice low. "House with a porch, maybe a garden, room for more than one horse." She lifted her eyes to meet his. "And if I want more than horses and fields?" Merritt held her gaze. "Then I'll give you that too." She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred her hair, and somewhere across the field, thunder murmured low. "I want a home," she said finally, "not a stopping place, not something borrowed." "Then let's build it," he said, "proper." They spent the next weeks clearing the parcel. Naomi hauled brush and stacked stones while Merritt dug post holes and split pine for the foundation. They worked without hurry, each task part of a rhythm they were learning together. One morning, Merritt handed her a chisel and a length of wood. "House needs a beam to hold the ridge," he said. "Thought you might want to carve something into it." Naomi sat cross-legged on the ground, the wood across her lap. "I don't know what to say." "Say what the place means to you." She thought for a long time before setting the blade to the grain. Her hand moved slowly, cutting each letter with purpose. When she was done, she called him over. He read the line aloud, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "No longer waiting." They lifted the beam together. He secured it, and she watched the house begin to take shape, walls rising from the soil, rooflines stretching toward the sky. One evening, as the frame stood half-finished, Merritt returned from town with a wrapped parcel tucked beneath his arm. He handed it to her without a word. Inside was a bolt of blue calico, deep as river water. "For Sundays," he said. "I haven't worn a dress that wasn't mended twice over in years." "I know." She unfolded the fabric slowly. "You think there'll be Sundays here?" He stepped closer. "There'll be every kind of day if you stay." She looked up at him, eyes shining with something too big to name. Then I'll stay." They married beneath the cottonwoods at the edge of the creek, just the two of them and the sound of water moving slow over stone. He wore his cleanest shirt, and she wore a dress she made herself from the blue calico. The rings were plain, hammered from silver coins Merritt had carried in his coat since Dodge City. He took her hand and said, "This life, whatever comes, I want it with you." Naomi's voice never shook. "And I want it with you." They kissed, and the air felt still for the first time since she'd stepped off that coach. Not a beginning forced by need, but one chosen with open eyes. That night, they sat beneath the half-framed roof of the house they were building, backs against the wall, firelight flickering between them. Naomi rested her head on Merritt's shoulder, fingers laced with his. "You ever think about what we'd be if you hadn't come to that shack?" she asked. "I try not to," he said, "because I did." She smiled, eyes closed. "Then I'm glad," and Merritt touched her hand, slow and sure. "So am I." The stars pressed close overhead, and without speaking they knew they'd built something no storm could take apart. The house was 3 walls and a roof when the first storm rolled down from the Bitterroots, dragging a curtain of rain that bent the grass flat and turned the earth to a thick, clinging red. Naomi stood inside, arms crossed, listening to the soft percussion of water on new shingles. Merritt was out past the creek, helping the Jennings family drive their cattle to higher ground. He had left before dawn, saddle cinched tight, rifle slung over one shoulder. She had never minded rain before. But now, with the wind slipping through open frames and the firewood stack still damp from the week's work, she felt each hour stretch longer than the last. By nightfall, she had lit the lantern and moved her sewing close to it, but her hands wouldn't settle. The needle slipped twice. She pricked her thumb and let the blood bead without wiping it away. A knock came just after dark, not on the door, it hadn't been hung yet, but on the frame. Naomi stood quickly, the lantern flickering as she moved. Merritt stood there with mud streaked to his knees and water running from the brim of his hat. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw was tight. She stepped back. "You're soaked." They lost one calf in the wash, but the rest made it. He pulled his hat off and set it on the bench. "Creek's up near the bank. Won't stay that way long. Were you hurt?" "No." He unfastened his coat, water slapping the floor as he shrugged it off. "But I saw something today I wasn't expecting." Naomi folded her arms, waiting. He met her eyes. "A man in town, Riley Hammond, he was asking around about you." Her spine straightened. "That name doesn't mean anything to me. He said he was the one who sent for you, claimed you left before he could get word about changing plans." Naomi's face stayed still, but her voice dropped. "That man sent a letter promising a home, then nothing. No telegram, no note. I waited 3 days before anyone even said his name." "I know," Merritt said. "I didn't answer him. Just told him you were doing fine and didn't need chasing down." She turned from him, her hands curling into the sides of her skirt. "I don't want him near here." "He's not coming back," Merritt said. "He left with a bruised ego and more whiskey than sense." "But I thought you ought to know." She stared out toward the dark stretch of field beyond the lantern's reach. "I came here thinking I'd be someone's wife, that I'd have to earn a place by being quiet, by making do. I didn't expect to matter to anyone without asking." "You don't have to ask," Merritt said. She turned. "Then say it plain." He stepped forward, boots leaving damp prints across the floor. "You're not someone I pitied, not someone I meant to fix. I saw you standing in that doorway with nothing but your back straight and your eyes clear, and I thought there's someone who wants to build something real." Naomi's voice caught. "And if I'm still learning how to trust that, then I'll wait. I'll keep building." She reached for his hand, the one not still dripping rain. Her fingers were dry, warm. She held to him like it meant something, because it did. By morning, the storm had passed. The air smelled of wet grass and pine, and small birds darted through the unfinished rafters. Naomi made coffee over the coals, the tin pot hissing where the fire licked its sides. Merritt came in from checking the fence line, his shirt slung over one shoulder. "There's a family moving in 2 parcels over," he said, pulling up a stool. Got 3 kids and a wagon that's barely holding together. Naomi poured coffee into 2 cups. You thinking of helping them? They'll need it. And I figured we could offer supper once they're settled. She smiled at that, the ease in his voice, the way he said we without thinking twice. I'll bake bread. Might be the first time I've done it for someone besides just us. Merritt took the cup, his eyes on hers. It won't be the last. The day moved slow and warm, the kind that settled into skin and bone. Naomi spent it staining the new floorboards with a mixture of ash and vinegar, something she'd learned from a neighbor back in Pennsylvania. Merritt worked on cutting the braces for the porch. They didn't talk much, just the occasional question, a quiet laugh, but the silence never felt empty. Late in the afternoon, she found him sitting on the step, knife in hand, whittling a small figure from a scrap of pine. She sat beside him, tucking her skirt beneath her knees. What is it? He turned it in his hand. Meant it to be a bird, came out more like a mule. She laughed, surprised. It's got wings. Not every bird flies straight. She leaned her head against his shoulder. I never thought I'd be glad the letter led me to the wrong man. Merritt didn't say anything right away. He just rested his hand over hers, rough and firm. Maybe it led you to the only one who knew how to stay. And as the sun dipped low, casting long gold across the frame of their unfinished life, Naomi knew there would be no more waiting. Only the quiet, steady unfolding of days made by hand and heart, side by side. By late July, the house stood with 4 walls and a roof that held against every gust. The porch stretched wide across the front, and Naomi had lined its edge with river stones she collected herself, each one rubbed smooth in her apron before she laid it down. The chimney was still missing its top row of brick, but the hearth inside drew well enough for cooking. Merritt was finishing the last of the shutters, his sleeves rolled high and hands steady with the plane. Naomi watched from the garden plot, where green shoots had begun to break the soil, radish and onion, mostly. She wiped her palms on her skirt and walked to where he worked. You ever think you'd build a place like this? She asked. Merritt didn't look up. I thought I'd always be mending someone else's fence, or riding out before first thaw. And now, he set the plane down and met her eyes. Now I think I was waiting for a reason not to. She stepped onto the porch beside him. I can't always explain what changed in me. I used to count the days like I was waiting for something to carry me off. Now I just want to stay still long enough to see a season through. You're not the only one. They stood in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things didn't need saying. The wind had softened. Even the sky felt closer. That evening, Naomi brought out a bundle of letters from the crate beneath their bed frame. She held them carefully, the way one might hold something that had once mattered more than it should have. These were from before, she said, settling beside him on the porch. I read them until I knew every line, and I believed every promise in them. Merritt didn't reach for the pages. You want to burn them? No, she said. I want to bury them. She led him to the cottonwoods by the creek. The earth was soft there, and she dug a shallow hollow with her hands. One by one, she laid the pages down, then pressed soil over them until they vanished. Not forgotten, but no longer needed, she looked up at him. I don't want to hold on to anything that kept me hoping for the wrong kind of life. You're building the right one now, he said. Back at the house, Merritt pulled a small iron box from beneath the cart bench. Inside was a set of tools Naomi hadn't seen before, finer, cleaner, wrapped in cloth. He unrolled them on the table. I saved these for something worth keeping, he said. Figured you could use them. She ran her fingers over the handles. For sewing, for making clothes, curtains, whatever you want, I reckon you'll need them come winter. Naomi's voice was quiet. You see us still here when the snow falls. I see us here every season, Merritt said. As long as you want me beside you. She looked at him, and her hand reached for his without hesitation. I do. They married again in the eyes of the law a week later when the circuit judge rode through with his ledger and his tired horse. Naomi wore a new dress she'd sewn from muslin and lace tucked away in a trunk Merritt had traded for. Merritt wore his father's vest, rubbed soft with use. There was no gathering, no feast. Just the two of them, the judge and the land that had watched them build something from near nothing. They laid the last brick on the chimney together that evening, hands dusted red with mortar. When it was done, Merritt turned to her, his fingers brushing back the hair the wind had pulled free. "You know," he said, "I didn't think I'd ever be needed by someone." "Not like this." Naomi leaned into him, her voice warm against his collar. "You're not just needed, you're loved." He kissed her then, slow and certain, with the kind of reverence a man gives to a thing he never believed he'd deserve. That fall, the garden yielded enough to trade for flour and salt. Merritt built shelves for the root cellar, and Naomi lined them with jars she filled herself. In the evenings, they read by lamplight or sat on the porch, listening to the cattle lowing in the dark. She embroidered a shawl for the winter, and he whittled her a comb from cherry wood. One morning, as the frost began to silver the grass, Naomi pressed his hand to her belly and whispered something that turned his breath to mist. He looked at her, wonder plain on his face. "Are you sure?" she nodded, eyes bright. "Yes." His arms wrapped around her, strong and careful, and for a long while he held her without saying anything at all. They added a cradle room before the snow came, and Merritt carved a rocking chair with his own hands. Naomi sewed blankets lined with wool and stitched tiny shirts while the fire warmed the space between them. When the baby came a girl, born in the quiet hush of early spring, Merritt held her like he'd held everything else he'd built, with care, with awe, and with a steady heart. Naomi watched him rock their daughter beneath the cottonwoods, the creek running soft behind him, and she knew fully that she had not just survived the world's turning. She had found her place in it. And Merritt, the man who once wandered fence lines with no place to rest, had found his home in her. They grew old in that house with the stone-lined porch and the garden that changed with the seasons. And every morning, Merritt rose before dawn and laid the fire, so Naomi could wake to warmth. Every day, she stitched a new piece of their life into memory. And every night, they lay down beside each other, not with longing, not with fear, but with peace hard-earned and deeply kept.